Welcome to another episode of Kingdom Perspectives, presented by WisdomApologetics.com. Our host today is Christian apologist Prince and Angie Nwankadu.
Welcome to another episode of Kingdom Perspectives. Today my co-host is my wife, Angie Nwankadu. You'll be wondering why we're wearing these robes and all that. This is representative of a church robe and hers is a lab coat. She's actually a lab scientist, and this is a church robe because we want to discuss the subject of relationship between science and faith. And I have a testimony. My first degree was in microbiology, and I answered the call my senior year. So when I answered the call, I was like, what am I going to do with my microbiology? And you know, there is this whole teaching and this whole feeling that when you answer the call of God, you just go to Bible school, study the Bible, and begin to preach or pastor and thereabout. But at that time, I didn't know that God could use microbiology in the area of ministry. So for almost 20 years, my certificate in microbiology was lying without being used for anything. And I'm saying that to say that there is this wrong teaching that there's a dichotomy between science and faith. And in fact, my wife too is a lab scientist right now. She works in the lab. Like many of you that are listening, you might be a medical doctor, you might be a biologist, you might be a physicist, any field of science. But you go to work every day and you don't see any relationship between your science and your faith. Today we're going to go into that and then tell you about how science and faith really work together. Now, I'll turn over to my wife to tell us about the four views of the relationship between science and faith. A lot of people have views about the relationship between science and faith.
There are four views concerning the relationship between science and faith. The first would be conflict. The second, compartmentalization. The third is complementary. And the fourth is qualified agreement.
Just like my wife said, there are four views of relationship between science and faith. Number one is the conflict view. Those who hold to this conflict view believe that science and faith can never mix. In fact, it's like perpetual conflict that will never end. Number two is compartmentalization view. And this is also called NOMA, non-overlapping magisteria. That is, they are independent and they just do their thing in their different spheres, and that's it. Number three is the complementary view. In this complementary view, those who hold to it believe that there is some kind of relationship, but when science and faith are speaking of the same reality and there's a conflict, then science takes upper hand. The fourth one is the qualified agreement view. And in this agreement, qualified agreement view, both science and faith have mutual epistemic support. That is to say, if there is a conflict, both the science and the faith, the interpretations, are reevaluated to be sure that they are speaking the truth. And any of them that has an issue with the truth will be reevaluated further to correct such interpretation. We're going to take you now to a presentation I made at the Veritas Forum, hosted by Wisdom Club, University of Alaska, Anchorage, where I was discussing the issue of relationship between science and faith. Let's watch.
When you talk about science and faith, the major thing that you have to think about is, like Greg said, what does faith mean? And what does science mean? And it so happens that these two concepts are the most misunderstood concepts in our generation. Faith is taken as something you just, believe, without even thinking. But the biblical faith and what it really means has to do with a process of deliberation of the mind. because you cannot be convicted or convinced about something until there has been a mind deliberation. So faith can never really work without an element of reasoning. Even when you believe that faith is a gift, it's given to you, and your acceptance has to go through a process of reasoning. Because for you to accept the gift God has given you and to use it, you have to think through what that gift is doing in your life. So faith in itself is trust, and trust is not a standalone concept. Trust is a product of the deliberation of the mind that makes you or leads you to a judgment of either to put your trust on something or to withhold your trust from that thing. And the same thing goes with science. It might surprise most of you here, especially those who are in the scientific field, that there is no actual definition of science to date. It is still up in the air. But there is still a scope, there is still a boundary for what is not science. But for you to say exactly this is science or this is not science is very difficult. Under the metaphysical materialistic framework, like Greg said, it's easy to exclude every other thing that is not materialistic. But that doesn't define science, that defines materialistic position. It is either philosophical materialism or methodological materialism. That doesn't define science. And also it might shock you to know that scientific methodology itself, as we have it today, was started by a Christian. It is the Christian worldview that led to the open-mindedness to search and to seek for truth in nature in a methodological way, because the early fathers of modern science thought it necessary to follow theological convictions and bring it into science and use it to advance science. So my contribution today is going to be in the area of really examining the topic, is it really a conflict, science and faith, or have they really helped each other? Greg also mentioned something about that when it comes to questions of reality. Most of the scientists that are not Christians or theists are allowed to make some judgmental conclusions and actually adjudicate on fields of religion. But when somebody who has just a faint interest in religion makes such conclusions, his own conclusions are ruled out. But he reveals something else. What does that reveal? It reveals that you cannot really address the entirety of reality without something that has to do with religion coming in. In fact, once you have something metaphysical coming in, you have already gone beyond the scope of science. And once it's metaphysical, it could address both material and immaterial things. So in that sense, we're dealing with a situation where anyone that thinks that science and religion are in conflict doesn't understand those two fields, and in fact doesn't understand the concept of reality. Another thing I want to point out is that in the history of science, Christianity has played a major role over the years. There are a few examples where there have been like conflicts, like some of you might be ready to send some questions here. There are some bites that go around, and that is like Galileo's case, Bruno, etc. Those are just few cases that dotted the history of science. They are not the normal process of interaction between science and faith. And in fact, those cases too have the real history behind them. If you dig deep and study it deeply, like some of us have done, you'll find out that the case of Galileo was not a case of conflict of science and faith. There were a whole lot of other factors, and in fact, Galileo himself remained a committed Catholic until his death. So it wasn't a matter of his faith conflicting with his science, but it was a matter of the prevailing scientific structure of the day. Many of you don't have a clue that there was another theory that was competing with the Copernican theory at that time, and most people who come against faith today don't even talk about it. And it was called the Tychonic system. The Tychonic system was able to solve the same problems that Copernicus system was solving without going as far as the Copernican system did. So at that time, there were two competing theories, which Galileo did not want to accept. He only projected Copernicanism and was trying to push the church to change their position from the geocentric system to heliocentric. But the normal scientific process of allowing a theory to emerge as a superior theory was not followed by Galileo. It was until Newton that Newton now proved through the laws of gravity that the heliocentric system was a superior theory above the geocentric system. So it was more of a scientific conflict than a religious conflict. But then Galileo himself was making religious impressions by trying to make the church adopt some religious systems that they didn't want to accept. The same case with Bruno, that one I'm not going to go into, but Galileo is one of the poster children that you always hear people throwing around. But the conflict wasn't the way it is, because we have always heard that it was the church. They kicked him out because he was providing us good science. And in fact, Copernicus himself was a Christian. I don't know if you know that. So it wasn't like he wasn't a Christian. I remained a Christian to his death. In fact, Copernicus was a dean, in his church. So it wasn't as if there has always been this conflict. Number one is that Christian theism is known to have played a major role in the development of modern science. Many fathers of modern science were Christians who believed that God created the universe to be discoverable. Evidence of this fact and the positive effects of Christian theological premises on the growth of science are exemplified in the works of James Clerk Maxwell, which you mentioned some of them, in Isaac Newton. You have people like Francis Bacon, who discovered the scientific method. And you also have so many others. There has always been this mutual benefit when people mix their scientific findings with their Christian faith. That's what led them to where we are today. Number two, the theological principles that inspired somebody like Francis Bacon was shown in what he said. And I quote, "The scientific pioneers such as Newton and the chemist Robert Boyle saw their task as working with God and working with God's gifts of the senses and minds to recover a lost knowledge of nature." Unquote. So in the much debated area of cosmology and so many other areas of science, both Copernicus and Galileo, like I said earlier, were Christians, as well as Tycho, Kepler, and Newton. So these are all Christians who were the founding fathers of modern science. But the major point that I want to make here today is that if there were a conflict, a real conflict between science and faith, we will not have the record that we have among the Nobel Prize winners. A man called Baruch Chavez has written a book, 100 Years of the Nobel Prize. And I'll read from what I wrote here. This is like a condensed version. So if you want to check out the book, it's called 100 Years of Nobel Prizes by Baruch Chavez. In this book, from 1901 to 2000, it shows that there have been 654 Nobel laureates. only 10.5% were atheists or agnostics or free thinkers. So free thinkers, atheists, and agnostics combined make up 10.5% of the 654 laureates, whereas 65.4% were Christians. These are science Nobel Prize winners in science. And 20% Jews. That means that Judeo-Christian faith combined, both Jews and Christians, make up 85.4% of the total Nobel winners. Baruch Shalev records, and I quote, Christians have won a total of 78.3% of all Nobel Prizes in peace, 72.5% in chemistry, 65.3% in physics, 62% in medicine, 54% in economics, 49.5% in literature. And Jews have won 17% in chemistry, 26% in medicine and physics, 40% in economics, 11% in peace and literature. So these combined make up 85.4% of Nobel Prizes. These percentages are striking because they show that top successful scientists, which amounts to about 89.5% in chemistry, 91.3% in physics, and 88.0% in medicine, are affiliated to Judeo-Christian theistic tradition. This report is an indication that rather than religion being an enemy of science and scientists, it seems to be a facilitator of scientific innovation. Thank you.
Welcome back. Now you know that Christians are not supposed to be intimidated by the false idea that science is in conflict with faith. And also, you're not supposed to be intimidated by anyone that says that Christians are morons, because now you know that the top Nobel Prize winners in science are Christians. So you can really be proud of that and know that Christians can maintain their faith and at the same time be very good scientists. Don't get intimidated. Don't run away from science, mostly young people. If you study the history of science, you know that there have been many Christians that have been top scientists. Name them: James Clerk Maxwell, Isaac Newton, Francis Bacon, Tycho, Galileo, Copernicus, up to today. And today we still have a lot of top scientists who are Christians who do not subscribe to methodological naturalism or to the atheistic worldview. They believe in God, they believe that God created the whole universe, and many of them also do not believe in Darwinism. So you need to know that, mostly young people out there. Don't be intimidated, because there are Christians that are top scientists that stand on their faith and what the Bible says, and they're still doing well as scientists. I know you've also heard that science has disproved God. In fact, many young people, who don't believe in God today, when you ask them, why don't you believe in God? They will say science. Science has disproved God. But the point is, science cannot, when I say cannot, with capital, cannot disprove the existence of God. Why? Because God himself is a spirit and is beyond the scope of science. So that right there means that science can never come to a point where science will say, oh, we have disproved the existence of God. Now, let me tell you one thing. The existence of God, rather, has been shown through scientific evidence. Scientific evidence every day confirms that the universe is designed. And from being designed, we get to who designed it. And at the end of the day, it points towards God. So rather than science disproving the existence of God, science, as we get more advanced, has increasingly shown the existence of a creator. Do not be intimidated by science or when you hear about science. Listen, God is the one that created science. He created the universe and he made it discoverable. And if you notice, Genesis chapter 1 verse 26 says that let us make man in our own image and likeness. And then you read further, it says,
that man would subdue, have dominion over creation. And if you think well, you will notice that in the process of subduing and ruling over the earth, man has to do science. So in that whole original purpose of creating human beings, God instituted the scientific inquiry. That's what we do today. We explore. In fact, when you read again, chapter 2 tells us that God was the first person that planted a garden. So apart from the creation story of Genesis 1, which has both miracles and all that involved in it, creation ex nihilo, and the whole way God fashioned the universe, if you don't want to deal with Genesis chapter 1, come to chapter 2. He planted, the Bible says it that way, he planted a garden. And then he called Adam later on and said, come and give names to these animals that he created. So that was when he introduced him to taxonomy, you know. So there are a lot of ways to see that God is a God of science. So what I'm trying to say is, science is not an enemy of God. When science is done honestly, when science is done with open mind, when science is done without bias. But the problem we have today is that naturalists and atheists have taken over the scientific field. In fact, I will not say that have taken it over in the sense that they are the only ones doing science, but they have so much propagated their propaganda and projected their ideology that many people now think that science is in conflict with faith. But it has not been so. Like what you saw in the seminar, there are a lot of Christians who are scientists today, and there have been a lot of Christians in the history of science. Now, that takes us to some fallacies that are flying around. One of them is either or fallacy. When somebody tells you you are either a scientist or a Christian, don't fall to that. That is flatly wrong. There's no way you can say you are either a scientist or a Christian. That's a categorical mistake in the first place. So a lot of Christians are scientists today, and a lot of Christians are going to be scientists tomorrow. And scientists have been Christians over the history of science. So Christians can become scientists without falling into methodological or philosophical naturalism. Now, the next fallacy is that science deals with facts and faith deals with subjective things. Like anything about faith, it depends on what you think, you know. Different people think different things about faith. No, there is objective truth and there's objective reality when it comes to things of faith. And so when you talk about objective truth, objective reality, you are dealing with things that are facts. Now, science, when you also say that science deals with facts, science is not neutral in the sense that science is interpreted by scientists. So the data itself would say something, but the scientists will interpret something different. And because these are experts in the field, they bring in their horizon, they bring in their presuppositions, and then what you see, and when they write their reports, is their own evaluation of the data, not the data itself. So that is why different scientists come up with different reports when examining the same data. So why is that? It's because scientists are not neutral. And you need to know that. So science, when it says this with facts, the point is that science doesn't just show up and say, here are the facts. The science we know, just the interpretation that we get from the scientists. You know one example you will always remember that would explain the relationship of science to knowledge to faith? Let's just assume Aunt Madia lives in Tennessee and she decides to make a cake for her granddaughter. And she gets the recipe, makes the cake, prepares it, leaves it on her kitchen counter, waiting for the time for the birthday dinner. Then she leaves the house and the scientist shows up thinking he knows everything, and shows up and looks at the cake and starts giving us the scientific constituents of the cake and even how many molecules are contained in the cake. And then somebody walks up to the scientist and says, "Scientist, do you know why this cake was made?" Of course, the scientist would try to answer that, but I assure you he will not get the correct answer. Because the knowledge about why the cake was made cannot be deciphered from scientific experimentation. You have to ask Aunt Madia, why did you make this cake? And then Aunt Madia would now tell us why she made the cake. If she never tells us, we may never know. So that is where you will see the limitation of science. When scientism tells us that science is the only way to have knowledge, it is easy to show that that is false, because science can tell us the how and the what of the cake, but it can't tell us the why of the cake, except Aunt Madia tells us the why of the cake. But scientism is an ideology that has brought naturalism at the center of scientific enterprise. And that is what is prevalent today. But unfortunately, science, for example, cannot define science. For you to define science, you have to bring in philosophy. It's philosophy that gives us definitions. So there's no way for science to scientifically prove what science is. It is philosophy that will tell us what science is. So in that sense, science itself cannot even stand, because if there's no other knowable knowledge outside empirical systems or through the scientific method, in quotes, then science will not be able to be defined. So that's why we're encouraging Christians to acquire knowledge, to have intellectual dominion, to be able to explore the world God has given to us. Don't be limited in the things that you know. Don't be limited in just what you can get, like blessings, prosperity, and all that. Those things are all good. But then you need to be able to use your mind and be able to develop it, so that in this culture, we'll be able to deliver the gospel with wisdom, with understanding, and with knowledge. Thank you. Thank you for watching this episode of Kingdom Perspectives. I hope you are blessed. We would like to connect with you. So please connect with us on social media. You will see the social media handles on the screen. Connect with us. I really want to connect with you. And send us your questions, your comments. We would like to hear from you. It's very important, because I know that many Christians out there have questions. So this is the platform to ask all kinds of questions. Even questions you are finding difficult asking your pastor. Topics that are difficult. Issues like homosexuality. Issues like transgenderism. Issues like, just name it, same-sex marriage. All kinds of things. Ask us questions. Science and religion. Please, students, ask us questions. Your professor says something that you think is contrary to the scriptures, send us your questions. We're here to answer your questions and help you learn how to articulate your faith. And please don't forget the support aspect. So when you go to our website, you know what to do. And then on our screen, you will see our text to give. At your leisure, prayerfully support this broadcast. Thank you again for watching.